Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we will be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Kuf Tes Amud Beis. This will be the share that's on the Dirshu schedule as the first day of Sukkos. We're continuing to learn Hilchos Sukkah, and we pick up today on the bottom of Kuf Tes Amud Aleph, Siman Taf Reish Mem Aleph. Very interesting short little siman over here regarding the brachas that we make on the sukkah. What happened to I had a note card here somewhere. Oh, here it is. It's very interesting. There's a Gemara in Menachos. The Gemara in Menachos on Daf Mem Beis says that we don't make a bracha on the building of the sukkah. We make a bracha of Leishev Basukah. We make a bracha Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu Leishev Basukah. Baruch Atah Hashem Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav, who sanctified us and is mekadesh us with his mitzvahs. When we do a mitzvah, it increases our kedusha. So Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu, and he commanded us Leishev Basukah, to live in the sukkah. But how about a bracha on the asiyah of the sukkah, on the making of the sukkah? So the Gemara in Menachos on Daf Mem Beis tells us we do not make a bracha on the making of the sukkah. Interestingly enough, the Yerushalmi disagrees with that. The Yerushalmi says that we do make a bracha on the building of the sukkah. Now, if you look at the Gemara in Menachos in the Bavli, the Gemara in Menachos says the reason we don't make a bracha on the building of the sukkah is because the building of the sukkah does not have to be done by a yid. You could be yotze the mitzvah of sukkah with a sukkah that was built by a non-Jew. In that case, how could we say Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu? The Rebbeinu Shalom didn't necessarily command us to build a sukkah. Even a non-Jew could build the sukkah for us, and then we can go ahead and use the sukkah. If the sukkah was constructed l'shem tzeil, if it was constructed as a shelter, so it has and everything is kosher about it, it meets all the prerequisites of a sukkah, we could be yotze the mitzvah in that sukkah. So we don't really have a tzivui to build a sukkah. We could be yotze the mitzvah of sukkah without us building a sukkah. But the Yerushalmi says that we do make a bracha on the asiyah of the sukkah, and that could be because, according to the Yerushalmi, if a non-Jew would make a sukkah, a yid would have to go ahead and be mechadish ba'davar. He would have to at least add something to it. So the Yerushalmi seems to disagree with the Bavli on that fact as well. But in any case, in the Bavli, in Menachos, it says that we do not make a bracha on the asiyah of the sukkah. Now, there's a famous Tshuvas Chasam Sofer. The Tshuvas Chasam Sofer says that we don't make a bracha on the asiyah of the sukkah because it's only a hechsher mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah in of itself to build the sukkah. We build the sukkah as a preparatory step to be able to live in the sukkah, to be yotze the mitzvah of sukkah. Similar to making the sakin, the knife for a bris milah. That's a hechsher mitzvah. There's no mitzvah to make the knife. It's a hechsher mitzvah. You need a knife in order to be able to make the milah. You make a bracha on the milah, but you don't make a bracha on the preparation of the sakin, the making of the knife. That's Chasam Sofer. There's an Aruch L'Ner that's really coming from a Rashi in Makis that says, no, there is a mitzvah of asiyas sukkah, and we can see this in the pasuk. The pasuk says, Chag HaSukkos taseh lecha shivas yamim. And the Gemara seems to understand that pasuk on going on the asiyah of the sukkah. Chag HaSukkos taseh lecha, you should make for yourself the Yom Tov of Sukkos. What does it mean to make the Yom Tov? Part of the asiyah is the asiyah of the sukkah. And it's from that word taseh, for instance, that we learn out the halacha of taseh v'lo min ha'asui. We learned about the psul. When you make a sukkah, you have to make it bekashrus. You can't go ahead and, let's say, build the walls of a sukkah and then drape the vines of a grapevine over the sukkah as schach. So that schach is possible because it's mechubar l'karka, it's still attached to the ground, and then after you drape it on the sukkah, cut it off the ground. Because the halach is taseh v'lo min ha'asui. You have to put up the schach bekashrus. When you put up the schach, it has to be kosher as schach. In the case I just gave you, you draped the vines over the sukkah, you put the schach on the sukkah when it was puzzle, and then you went and cut it in order to make it kosher. That's a violation of the rule of Taseh v'lo min asui. That comes from the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Taseh lecha. So that pasuk, at least to some degree, says the Aruch LaNer, is going on the asiyah of the sukkah. So the Aruch LaNer says no. The asiyah of the sukkah is a mitzvah. And really it would be proper to say Asher Kiddishanu B'mitzvayis V'tzivanu on the building of the sukkah. So why don't we make a bracha? Says the Aruch LaNer, we don't make a bracha because even though it's true that the building of the sukkah is a mitzvah, but it's not the completion of the mitzvah. If you would just build a sukkah, you wouldn't be mekayim the mitzvah. You have to build the sukkah and you have to live in the sukkah. And therefore, you can't make a bracha on what essentially is only the beginning of the mitzvah. And that's really what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say over here as well. So let's take a look here. Siman Taf Reish Mem Aleph. She'ein mevarchin shehechayanu al asiyas hasukah. The title of the siman, the topic really, is the question of the shehechayanu. When is it appropriate to make a shehechayanu? And the Mechaber says in the heading, we don't make the shehechayanu when we build the sukkah. So says the Mechaber Tzif Aleph. Ha'isa sukkah, someone who builds a sukkah, bein la'atzmai, bein la'acher, whether he's building it for himself or he's building it for someone else, einoi mevarech al asiyasa. You do not make a bracha on the building of the sukkah. There's no bracha asher kiddishanu b'mitzvayis v'tzivanu lasois sukkah. And if you take a look at the Be'er HaGoyla on the side in Ois Katan Aleph, he brings this down from the Gemara in Menachos on Mem Beis Amud Aleph. Meimer de Rav Chisda Menachos Mem Beis Amud Aleph. That's the Gemara that I told you about. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Aleph, Eino mevarach al asiyasa, she'ein asiyasa gemar mitzvah. Because like I told you, from the Aruch LaNer, the building of the sukkah is not the completion of the mitzvah. Sharei tzarech leishev ba. In order to be mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah, you have to live in the sukkah, you have to eat in the sukkah, you have to sleep in the sukkah. And therefore, you can't make a bracha on the building of the sukkah. The Aruch HaShulchan over here, in his words, again, he gives you really three different reasons why you don't make a bracha. He says over here, Ein mevarchin be'es asiyasa. We don't make a bracha at the time of the building of the sukkah. We don't say Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvayis v'tzivanu lasei sukkah. K'moshe mevarchin al hamila v'al pidyon haben. We make a bracha on accomplishing the mitzvah of milah. We say Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvayis v'tzivanu al hamila. We make a bracha on pidyon haben, but we do not make a bracha on the building of the sukkah. V'atam hoyanire pashut. The Aruch HaShulchan says there seems to be a very simple reason. Dishnei brachos loy takinu al mitzvah achas. Aruch HaShulchan has a novel approach here. He says it would not be appropriate to make two brachos on one mitzvah. He says even if you view the building of the sukkah as a mitzvah, it's only part of the greater mitzvah of leishev basukah, of living in the sukkah. So what are we going to do? We're going to have one bracha on the asiyah, one bracha on the yeshiva. The Aruch HaShulchan says for that reason we don't make a bracha on the asiyah. U'lechein b'mila pidyon haben zuhi berchasam. By mila and pidyon haben, there's one bracha when you do the mitzvah. Aval b'sukkah sheyesh bracha acheres leishev basukah loy takinu oid bracha. Okay. V'aynu taima de tzitzis u'trilin v'shayfer v'lulav shein mevarchan al asiyasan. The Mishnah Berurah is going to say differently. Amnam b'menachos nasdu taima macherim al zeh. The Gemara Menachos gives different reasons. Ha'echad kevin dikam sukkahs nagvach kishera, since a sukkah that's made by a non-Jew is kosher. Im ken lo nitztavinu al asiyas hasukkah. V'oid tam mishum she'ein ze gemara mitzvasa. And again, this is not the completion of the mitzvah. The Gemara mitzvah hava b'yeshivasa u'lechein oz tzrichin levarech leishev basukah. Okay, so we don't make a bracha on the asiyah of the sukkah, and we've given some reasons for that. Okay, now let's go weiter. Says the Mechaber, right by those cutting bays for the Mishnah Berurah, Aval shehechiyanu hayoroi levarech kisha oisa oisa la'atzmai. But it would have been appropriate to make a shehechiyanu when you build the sukkah, when you make the sukkah for yourself. Really, says the Mechaber, it would seem to have been appropriate to make a shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah, because the building of the sukkah, you're preparing for a mitzvah. You're doing something that only comes once a year. So he says it would be appropriate, you would have thought, to make a shechiyanu and thank Hashem for the fact that you reached this time of year where it's now time to build a sukkah for the mitzvah. But, says the Mechaber, however, Ella she'anu saimchem al zman she'anu oimrim ala kais shel kiddush. However, says the Mechaber, even though you would have thought that it would be appropriate to make the shechiyanu taka when you build the sukkah, that's not what we do. What we do is we rely on the shechiyanu that we make when we make kiddush in the sukkah, when we actually eat in the sukkah. Okay, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut and base. Aval shechiyanu. The Mechaber says you would have thought that it would be appropriate to make a shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if I'm telling you that it would be appropriate to make a shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah, so how about making a shechiyanu when you form a shofar? How about making a shechiyanu when you write a Megillah? These are all things that you make for the accomplishment of a mitzvah. Are these things that you should make a shechiyanu on? Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'dafka davar she'oisen oisai mishana l'shana. The Mechaber is not suggesting that you should make a shechiyanu when you make, let's say, a Megillah. When you write a Megillah, that Megillah could be used for the next 20 years. Now let's understand what a shechiyanu is. When we think of a shechiyanu, what do we think about? Well, we make a shechiyanu, let's say, when we eat a seasonal fruit that's only available at one season during the year. What are we doing? We're thanking Hashem for allowing us to reach another milestone. We're reaching another year when that fruit is available. We make a shechiyanu when we're mekayim a mitzvah that we're only mekayim once a year. So when we go to hear shofar on Rosh Hashanah, we make a shechiyanu because Baruch Hashem, thank you, Rabbeinu Shalom, we reached another Rosh Hashanah to be mekayim the mitzvah of shofar. We make a shechiyanu when we go to light the Chanukah licht because again, thank you Hashem for allowing us to reach another Chanukah, another year, another mitzvah that comes once a year. That's when we make a shechiyanu. But when you write a Megillah, it's not a once-a-year thing. You write a Megillah, that Megillah could last for 20 years. You make a shofar, that shofar could last for 100 years. So that's not something that's seasonal, that we thank Hashem for reaching that yearly milestone. So that's why the Mishnah Berurah says here, while the Mechaber suggests it would have been appropriate to make a shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah, that's because generally speaking, we put up the sukkah every year. So whether it's a mitzvah in of itself, or even if it's only a hechsher mitzvah, but it's a hechsher mitzvah or a mitzvah that occurs once a year, it would have been appropriate to thank the Rabbeinu Shalom for reaching that yearly milestone of being able to go ahead and build the sukkah. So v'dafka davar she'oisen oisai mishana l'shana. Aval shofar or Megillah she'oisen oisai l'kama shonim einu mavarich shechiyanu ala siyasan. Now he says, how about v'ner Chanukah? Not the brach of shechiyanu that we do make the first night of Chanukah on lighting the Chanukah licht. That's a shechiyanu that we make on the mitzvah, similar to the shechiyanu that we make before we hear shofar. How about, he says, making a shechiyanu when you prepare the Chanukah licht for the first time? The same way we're suggesting that it would be appropriate to make a shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah, because that's, let's say, a hechsher mitzvah that we only reach once a year. So the first night of Chanukah, when you go and you prepare the lechtalach, maybe you should make a shechiyanu on the preparation of the lechtalach. So the Mishnah Berurah says no. He says, V'ner Chanukah nami eino minkar she'oisen l'shem mitzvah. There's a different problem by the Chanukah licht. And that is that, especially in those days when people lit their homes with oil lamps, when somebody is sitting and preparing an oil lamp, it's not minkar, it's not recognizable that he's doing an act, which is an act l'shem mitzvah. Maybe he's just preparing a lamp to learn by. He's not preparing a lamp for Chanukah lich. Since it's not minkar, we don't make a shechiyanu. Ois cotton gimel, kisha oisa oisa. It would have been appropriate to make a shechiyanu when we build the sukkah. V'hu adinim haisa asuya mikvar, or even if the sukkah was already built, you left your sukkah up from last year. V'hu mechadish badavar, but you have to add something to it to make it kosher. Dahainu, for example, shahaya barak shnei defanings. Let's say you only had 2 walls up on the sukkah, and we know that a 2-wall sukkah is not kosher. You need at least 2 walls, and then the tefach and the tzuras ha-pesach. So let's say you had 2 walls up, v'hu ishlima akshav, and now you put up what you need for a 3rd wall to make it kosher. Oy shechitcha b'haschach, or you didn't have sufficient schach, and you're adding on schach. In either way, you're now making the sukkah kosher for this year, so it would have been appropriate to go ahead and make a shechiyanu. Now we turn the page to Kuf Tesam and Beis. The Mechaber said that, and we don't do it. On the bottom of Kuf Tesam and Aleph, the Mechaber said, Elu sha'anu saimchem al zman, sha'anu oimrim, and then we turn the page, ala koshel kiddush. We rely on the shechiyanu that we make on the first night and the second night in Chutz La'aretz. We make a shechiyanu as part of kiddush. That shechiyanu is going to cover the building of the sukkah. So it turns out, the Mechaber says, when we make a shechiyanu, when we sit down in the sukkah on the first night, what is that shechiyanu covering? That shechiyanu is covering Yom Tov. Every Yom Tov we make a shechiyanu in Kiddush, right? So we make a shechiyanu the first night on the Yom Tov. Thank you, Hashem, for allowing us to reach another Yom Tov of Sukkos. We also make that shechiyanu, that's the shechiyanu, it goes back on the building of the sukkah. Shechiyanu, thank you, Rabbeinu Shalom, for allowing us to reach the annual milestone, time to put up the sukkah. So we're Mekayim, even though we already built the sukkah, but we're making the Shechiyanu now also on the building of the sukkah, and we're also making the Shechiyanu on being Mekayim the mitzvah of Yeshivas sukkah. So when you sit down to make Kiddush the first night on Sukkos, Mirz Hashem, even though you're going to hear this shir, you might hear this shir after, I'm recording this shir before Sukkos, so some of you might hear it before Sukkos, but you should know that when you make that shechiyanu on the first night of Yom Tov, you're making a shechiyanu on 3 independent mitzvahs. You're making a shechiyanu on Yom Tov, you're making a shechiyanu on the Asiyas HaSukkah, and you're also making a shechiyanu on the Yeshiva B'Sukkah. You should have all 3 of those things in mind. Ois cotton dalad in the Mishnah Berurah, ala kois shel kiddush, shehu koi al mitzvah sukkah v'alachag. That shechiyanu is going to go on all 3 things. It's going to go on the mitzvah of sukkah, which is the mitzvah of yeshiva sukkah and the asiyas sukkah, and it's going to go on the chag as well. Now, the Mechaber does not tell us why we do this. The Mechaber says it is appropriate to make a shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah. However, we do not make a shechiyanu at the time that we build the sukkah. Instead, we wait and we roll it into the shechiyanu of Kiddush. And we roll it together with the shechiyanu on the Yom Tov and on the Yeshivas HaSukkah. We roll in the building of the sukkah into that shechiyanu. But the Mechaber does not tell me why. And the Mishnah Berurah also does not tell me why. But let's take a look here at a Bir Halacha. Kuf Tes Amid Aleph, the bottom. Bir Halacha Dibra Maschil Elo She'anu. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'im birach shechiyanu b'shas asiyah. Let's say you're going out to build your sukkah, and by the way, they say that this halacha that you could make a shechiyanu on the siyas sukkah is only if you're building the sukkah within 30 days of Sukkos. If you build the sukkah more than 30 days prior to Sukkos, you can't make the shechiyanu because it's not considered the zman of asiyas sukkah. The zman of asiyas sukkah is within 30 days of Sukkos. Like we saw the halacha previously, if you build a sukkah within 30 days of Sukkos, that sukkah is assumed to be built l'shem hachag. If you build the sukkah before 30 days before Sukkos, you put it up, we don't assume that it was made l'shem hachag. If you put it up l'shem tzel, it's a kosher sukkah. But we said halacha, you have to be mechadish badavar. You should add something to it lechatchila before Yom Tov. But if you build a sukkah within 30 days, then we assume, you don't have to say anything. The assumption is it was built l'shem hachag. So 30 days prior to Yom Tov is the zman of Yom Tov. So you could make a shechiyanu when you build your sukkah, as long as you're building it within 30 days of sukkahs. The mechaber said you could. Right? Royal of Arich. Royal of Arich. So you could make a shechiyanu then. Says the Bir Halacha here, let's say you did. You made a shechiyanu when you built your sukkah. Not like the mechaber. The mechaber says wait till Kiddush. You didn't want to. You were building your sukkah, you're so excited, pashut, you wanted to thank the Rebbeinu Shalom, and you made a bracha of shechiyanu. Mistapek per prima godim. The prima godim now has a suffix Im shuv yevarech zman b'shas kiddush al Yom Tov. Should you make a shechiyanu on the Yom Tov when you go to make kiddush? The Pri Megadim throws out the possibility that at least according to some Rishonim, you could be yotze the shechiyanu on the Yom Tov if you make the shechiyanu when you build the sukkah. Because why are you building the sukkah? You're building the sukkah to be mekayim the mitzvah of yeshiva sukkah for the Yom Tov of Sukkos. So maybe you could already thank Hashem now. You say shechiyanu v'kiyimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh for the time of building the sukkah, but wrapped up in that is also thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom for allowing you to reach the Yom Tov of Sukkos. So the Pri Megadim says, if you made a shechiyanu when you built the sukkah within 30 days of Sukkos, it could be you already covered all three requirements for shechiyanu. You made it on the asiyah, and also wrapped together with that is a shechiyanu on the Yom Tov and on the mitzvah of yeshivas hasukah. Maybe now by kiddush you don't make a shechiyanu. V'reisi b'Birkei Yosef, and the Chavetz Chaim continues and he says, I saw in the Sefer Birkei Yosef shedistapik amkein bazeh. He's also a supik. V'he'elah, and he brings up the ladas ha'toisvis v'harosh v'haran v'kolboy v'archas chayim lo yavarich. According to all of these Rishonim, the Birkei Yosef says you would not make another shechiyanu. Aval ladas ha'Rambam v'haramban v'haritva udi imayhu. But according to these Rishonim, none less than the Rambam, the Ramban, and the Ritva, and others, yavarich, you would make a bracha. So here we have a very heavy-duty machlokes Rishonim. Could the shechiyanu that you make at the time of the Asiyas HaSukkah, can it cover the Yom Tov and the mitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah? In which case you don't make another shechiyanu now at the arrival of Yom Tov by Kiddush, or no. Or maybe you made the bracha, it's not even Yom Tov yet. How could the shechiyanu go on the Yom Tov? So we have a major machlokes Rishonim. Umasik, and the Birkei Yosef concludes, Kevan the suffix pluktahu lo yavarich. Since we have this major machlokes Rishonim, for us it's a suffix brachas lahakal, a bracha is a din derabanan, suffix brachas lahakal, which means lo yavarich, you wouldn't make a bracha. So the Bir Halacha is coming out over here that if you made a shechiyanu when you made the sukkah, you would not be able to make a shechiyanu at the time of Kiddush. Now, could be that's the reason why we delay making the bracha until Kiddush. If you delay making the bracha of the shechiyanu on the building of the sukkah until Kiddush on Yom Tov, so now you're definitely good. You make that one bracha of shechiyanu by Kiddush, and you wrap together, you roll in all three requirements for the shechiyanu. The shechiyanu on the Yom Tov, it's Yom Tov already. The shechiyanu on the mitzvah of yeshivas HaSukkah, okay, you're sitting in the sukkah, you're using the sukkah. And the bracha on the asiyah, when you sit down to use the sukkah for the mitzvah, it's very appropriate to thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for allowing you to build such a beautiful sukkah. It's like, for example, it just struck me in my mind. If I have children who help me with the building of the sukkah, so very often on the first night of Sukkot, after I make Kiddush, I'll say, thank you to so-and-so for helping with the decorations. Thank you to so-and-so for helping me put up the schach. Thank you for so-and-so for helping me schlep the panels out from under the deck, etc., etc. Why are you thanking them then? Why not thank them a week before when you actually did it? Maybe I did say thank you then too. But you're thanking them now because now is when it all comes to fruition. Now is when we're using the sukkah. Now is when it's appropriate to thank. So we delay the making of the Shechianu, because if we make it B'Shas Kiddush, we could very easily roll all three requirements of the Shechianu into one, and with Zicha Yoitza, everything that we need to be Yoitza with the Shechianu. But if we make it earlier, when we build the Sukkah, now there are Rishonim that say that we're not Yoitza when we make that Shechianu. The Shechianu on the Yom Tov and the Shechianu on the Yeshivas HaSukkah. How could we be Yoitza? We're not sitting in the Sukkah. How could it be Yoitza Yom Tov? It's not Yom Tov yet. But now Safek Brachas Lahakel, so we can't make the bracha again. So according to those Rishonim, we're not Yoitza. Maybe that's the reason why we delay the Shechianu until Kiddush. Okay, now let's see an interesting Ramah here. Says the Ramah, excuse me. Says the Ramah, now, what if it's raining the first night of Sukkah? Well, if it rains, you're still going to make Kiddush and you're still going to make a Shechianu. Let's say something else happened. You were an Oinus, I don't know, you didn't have a Sukkah. Let's say you didn't eat the first night in the Sukkah. Let's say somebody Chas v'Shalom was a chayla, and he had some other tour of Sukkah. He wasn't able to eat in the Sukkah. So he didn't make a Shechianu. He ate in the house. He was somewhere in a locale. There was no Sukkah. He wasn't able to eat in the Sukkah on the first night of Sukkot. So what happens when he makes Kiddush? He has to make a Shechianu. That's part of Kiddush. He has to make the Shechianu on the Yom Tov, right? So now what? He made a Shechianu already, but the Shechianu that he made only went on the Yom Tov. It can't go on the building of the Sukkah. You're not using the Sukkah. It can't go on the mitzvah of Yeshivas HaSukkah. You're not eating in the Sukkah. So you covered one of the requirements for Shechianu. You made the Shechianu on the Yom Tov, but you did not make a Shechianu on the Sukkah. So V'im lo yachal laila rishayna b'Sukkah, says the Ramah, af al pi sheberach zman bebeisai, even though you are going to make a Shechianu when you're sitting and eating in your house on the first night, kisha oichel b'Sukkah, then tomorrow, if you go out to eat in the Sukkah tomorrow, even by day, the morning Suda, tzarich levarech zman. You got to make another Shechianu mishum Sukkah. You have to make another Shechianu to cover yourself for the Sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois cotton hay. Kisha oichel b'Sukkah, if you did not eat in the Sukkah on the first night of Sukkot at all, not it was raining and you went out and you made Kiddush in the Sukkah. You did not go into a Sukkah the first night of Sukkah at all. You ate inside your house. You made a Shechianu as part of Kiddush. You got to make another Shechianu, Kisha Oichel Basukkah, the first time you eat in the Sukkah, even if it's tomorrow morning, you got to make a Shechianu. Ritzayin Elohim Lamachar Bayayim. Tomorrow morning during the day, you got to make another Shechianu. Ois Katnavav Mishum HaSukkah. Because you need to make a Shechianu on the Sukkah. Da bracha sheberach me'esmal bebeisai. Because the bracha you made last night on the first night of Sukkot inside your house, hayarak b'shvel achag. That was a Shechianu on the Yom Tov, but it wasn't a Shechianu on the Sukkah. Interestingly enough, the Bach happens to disagree with this. The Bach says you can make a Shechianu on the first night. You made a Shechianu in your house. That Shechianu goes on the Sukkah too. And you wouldn't make another Shechianu. But the Ramah does not paskin like the Bach. The Ramah says over here that you do have to make another Shechianu. You have to make a Shechianu on the mitzvah of Sukkah. Let's just complete the Ramah here, the last few words of the Ramah. But if you did make a Shechianu at the time that you built the Sukkah, then you would not make another Shechianu. Because you made a Shechianu when you built the Sukkah. You made a Shechianu, the Ramah is saying, we saw the Bir Halacha that says that this is a suffix, and we say suffix brachas lahakal, but the Ramah is saying over here, if you made a bracha at the Asiyah, and you made a bracha also the first night when you ate in your house, now you're not going to make another Shechianu, because what do you have to make another Shechianu for? You already covered all your bases. Siman Tafresh Ben Beis, a Baisif Echad, and the Mechaber does not give a heading for this Siman. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, the only Sif, and Mechal Yom Rishon Shal Sukkos Liyos B'Shabbos. Sukkos falls out on Shabbos. The first night of Sukkos is Friday night. Oimrim Ba'arvis Bracha Achas Me'ein Sheva. The Shliach Tzibur, the Chazan, will recite the Bracha Achas Me'ein Sheva. What's the Bracha Achas Me'ein Sheva? We know that on Friday night, let me have my trusty little sitter that I keep upstairs over here. Friday night after Ma'ariv, we have something which is very, very unusual. We never have Chazaras Hashatz by Ma'ariv. The Chazan never repeats the Shemoneh Esrei by Ma'ariv, but Friday night there is somewhat of a Chazaras Hashatz by Ma'ariv. We have the bracha that the Chazan makes after we all say Vayechulu together. The Chazan starts off, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, v'Elokei Yaakov, Hakel Agadol Hagibar v'Hanor Hakel Elyon, Kainei Shamayim v'Aretz. That's basically the beginning of Shemoneh Esrei, right? Then he says Magen Avos B'Dvarai, the paragraph here of Magen Avos, which includes in it Mechaya Mesim. So that's the bracha of Tchi. So we already covered over here with the beginning of the bracha. We covered the bracha of Magen Avram. Then we say Mechaya Mesim. We include the bracha of Mechaya Mesim. Hakel HaKadosh. Now we include the bracha of Kedushas Hashem. Haminiach la'amay b'yom Shabbos Kachay. Now we're including over here the bracha of the Berchas Hayoim, the bracha of our Shemoneh Esrei, where we talk about Shabbos. B'kadesh HaShabbos u'mevarech Shvi. Then he says Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu Ritzei v'Menuchaseinu. He concludes Baruch atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos. So this is what's called the bracha Achas Me'ein Sheva. It's one bracha that's a me'ain. It kind of includes a little bit of all of the 7 brachas of our Shemoneh Esrei. So it's kind of an abridged Chazaras Hashatz. The Mechaber is telling us over here, if Sukkos falls out on Friday night, so the Shatz does make the bracha me'ain Sheva, like he would on any other Friday night. But v'chosim ba b'Shabbos bilvad. But when he concludes the bracha me'ain Sheva, all he says is Baruch atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos. He does not say Mekadesh HaShabbos u'mayadim or Mekadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael v'amayadim. He doesn't make a bracha on the Yom Tov. It's only on Friday night. It's only on the Shabbos. Mekadesh HaShabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Aleph Liyos b'Shabbos. So first, the Chavetz Chaim puts in a peripheral halacha over here. Many of us are familiar. If you look at the Machzer, in the Yom Tov Machzer, you'll see that by Ma'ariv, in Berchas Kriya Shema, there are Yotzros. Most of us probably don't say them. In some communities, they still say the Yotzros. Chavetz Chaim refers to them as the Ma'aravis. And we've learned this halacha already previously in Hilchas Yom Tov. Va'oz ein oimrim Ma'aravis b'leil rishon. The Chavetz Chaim says, when the first night of Sukkos falls out on Friday night, you don't say the Yotzros in Ma'ariv. Why? Interesting reason. Because we're not familiar with those words. It's something we only say once a year. Chashu, we were concerned, Shema Yitlu Neiros Liros Bahen. Somebody might come, he'll take the machzer, he'll go over to a nair, to an oil lamp, and if it's not light enough, he'll tilt the wick. And we know that Hatayas Haner is asar on Shabbos. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to tilt a lamp because it may make the flame burn a little bit bigger, a little bit brighter, and that would be an isser of Havara. Yeah, on Yom Tov, it's rather not a problem, but on Shabbos, it is a problem. On Yom Tov, you're allowed to be meisif onto a flame, but on Shabbos, you're not allowed to be meisif onto a flame. And since now Yom Tov is falling out on Friday night, and you're trying to read something that you're not familiar with, that might make somebody go over to a nair and be mount to the nair. Ubaleil sheni, and when this happens, then on the second night of Yom Tov, Oimrim Ma'aravis shel Yom Rishon. On Motzei Shabbos, when you can say Yotzros, says the Chavetz Chaim, you should say the Yotzros of the first night, not the Yotzros of the second night. V'hu adin, the same halacha would apply, Kishachal Shvi shel Pesach b'Shabbos. If the 7th day of Pesach lands up on Shabbos, again, you wouldn't say the Yotzros Friday night, and then on Achron shel Pesach, when you can say the Yotzros, you should say the Yotzros of Shvi shel Pesach, not the Yotzros of Achron. Oimrim Motzei Shabbos Ha'Ma'aravos Ha'Sharach L'Yom Shvi. V'hu adin b'Simchas Torah. The same halacha would apply to Simchas Torah. If Shmini Atzeres is Friday night, Oimrim Ha'Ma'arav shel Shmini Atzeres. Levad Leil Rishon V'Sheni shel Pesach. The only time that this rule, that if the first night falls out on Friday night, you don't say the Yitzris, and then on the second night you say the Yitzris on the first night, the only time that doesn't apply is on the first 2 days of Pesach. In that case, Sha'imir b'leil sheni hashayach l'leil sheni. In that case, if the first 2 nights of Pesach, if the first night of Pesach is Friday night, you can't say the Yitzris, again, because of the problem of Atayas on there. But now on Motzei Shabbos, when you can say the Yitzris, you should not say the Yitzris of the first night, you should say the Yitzris of the second night. Why? Mishum Bikar La Sfira, because we mentioned Sfira. And we want to make sure to mention Sfira because we have to start counting Sfira on the second night. Furthermore, the Chavetz Chaim says, Ein Oimrim Bamem Adlikin. We do not say Bamem Adlikin, which is the Mishnayos of the second parak of Shabbos. We don't say Bamem Adlikin when the first night of Sukkos, when the first night of Yom Tov falls out on Friday night, we don't say Bamem Adlikin. And the reason is because we say in Bamem Adlikin, Isartem, Iravtem, were you mafresh Trumas, were you mafresh your Maisris? We don't want to say that on Yom Tov because you can't be mafresh Trumas and Maisris on Yom Tov. Okay. Ice cut and bays, Bilvad. The Mechaber said that we say Berchas Me'en Sheva, but the this cold that I can't knock. Okay. The Shat says Bracha Achas Me'en Sheva, but he only concludes with Mekadesh HaShabbos. He doesn't mention Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Shaloi Niskana Ela Avor Shabbos Bilvad, because the whole reason we have this abridged Chazaras Hashatz was a tzorich for Friday nights. Why do we have this? Because on Friday nights they had a minhag to daven a little bit earlier, and they davened out in the fields. And there was a concern, what if somebody came late for davening? He started Shemona Esrei later than the rest of the tzibur. He's going to finish Shemona Esrei later than the rest of the tzibur. Everybody else might go home already and leave him alone in the fields. And that could be a sakana. So in order to make the davening a little bit longer, to allow time for a latecomer to finish his Shemona Esrei, they were misakin this bracha me'ein sheva for Friday nights. But it wasn't niskan for Yom Tov. They didn't make this takana for Yom Tov. So therefore, it's only appropriate to be misayim for Shabbos, not for Yom Tov. Batur Kasav, the Torah writes, Ba'ava Mikra Kodesh, that you can put in the words Ba'ava Mikra Kodesh in the davening, Vatita Lanu Hashem Elokeinu, Ba'ava, Mayadam L'Simcha Chagim, Uzman L'Sasayin, Es Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh, Mikra Kodesh. So the Torah says you add in Ba'ava Mikra Kodesh. Uvaminhagim Shalanu, in our Minhagim Kasav it's written Ve'ein Oimrim Ba'ava. We don't say Ba'ahava because we already have Ba'ahava in the beginning of the paragraph. Vatita Lanu Hashem Elokeinu Ba'ahava May'adim L'Simcha. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with Siman Taf Reish Mem Gimel. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The Sukkos of Liman HaTorah should be Megan and Gans Klal Yisrael. The Rosh should send Yeshua's for us, Parnas, and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS girl Tzedek Meher V'Yameinu. We should be zeichet to be Oil Regel for Yom Tov, not to have Yom Tov in Chutz La'aretz. Be well.